Pope Leo XIV is already making headlines, and it's been to the applause of some and to the just vitriol of others. I don't think any of these statements should be controversial, but they're making headlines. And I just wanted to start with the first one he said. Now, by the way, you can see all these on the Vatican's website. They release the Pope's statements, messages, homilies even. If you don't know, I'm Roger, and on this channel we discuss culture, philosophy, theology, history, art, all from a Christian point of view. In an audience to the members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, he's concerned about sort of misinformation in the world, division in the world, but he uses three key words here: peace, truth, and justice. And he talks about the peace that Christ can bring. He weaves that into his narrative about truth and justice. But I wanted to just focus on something that really is making headlines. It is the responsibility of government leaders to work to build harmonious and peaceful civil societies. He says this can be achieved above all by investing in the family, founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman. A small but genuine society, and prior to all civil society. This is really just clarifying and restating Catholic position that whatever else we do with all the nuances in the world, at some very deep natural level, and I don't think this is controversial, it shouldn't be. This is something that I think most societies throughout human history, Catholic or otherwise, have known. That at a natural level, a home, a stable union between a man and a woman is sort of just the natural unit, if you will. Now, in the modern world, we tend to make the natural unit, we focus on the individual, the full autonomy of the individual. And in Catholic teaching, of course, there are men and women who never get married. They feel called by God that their vocation should be full-time ministry in some sense, full-time devotion to God. So don't overread into this, but at some level, societies do benefit at a deep natural level with a home, a stable home between a mother, a father, and children. And this, if we have stable homes, this is a stabilizing factor for society. In addition, no one is exempted from striving to ensure respect for the dignity of every person, especially the most frail and vulnerable, from the unborn to the elderly. And I think, again, he's stating Catholic position, which I find encouraging. I think there's one thing about being kind to people who don't agree, or kind to people who identify with the LGBT movement or anything else. I saw an article today that was saying that monogamy is no longer cool, that really we should be promoting polyamorous relationships and things like this.
How about no?
I say that's bad for society, and I think we know this. There's a difference between being kind to people or sympathizing with what people go through or how they feel, and also compromising, I think, Christian teaching. So the Pope clarifying this, I think, is encouraging, but he says, from the unborn to the elderly, from the sick to the unemployed, citizens and immigrants alike. This has made some of my friends on the left quite angry, who are already losing hope that he's no Pope Francis. Well, Pope Francis did say similar things, to be clear, because whether someone is an immigrant or elderly or a child, even an unborn one, the geographical location of being in the womb or out of the womb doesn't change the value of your life in God's sight. I think nowadays, in an age of sort of warring nihilism and skepticism about the value of human life, of morality, it's just good that he's clarifying these things. And then he says, of course, truth. And here he makes echoes to things he said elsewhere. He says, truly peaceful relationships cannot be built also within the international community, say Russia and Ukraine, apart from truth. Where words can take on ambiguous and ambivalent connotations, in the virtual world, with its altered perception of reality, takes over unchecked, it is difficult to build authentic relationships, since the objective and real premises of communication are lacking. I've noticed the rise of loneliness and isolation. People don't really feel like they belong to the countries or societies in which they live, and they look for community elsewhere. I think this is one of the reasons various, for example, the LGBT movement has really caught traction, because people are trying to find community. That's just one of the reasons. Don't hear me saying more than I'm saying. But in the online world, so many of the things that you and I might discuss face to face, and you might be a decent person, or you might think I'm a decent person face to face, but if you see my angry comment screaming at you on the internet, well, I'm not thinking about your humanity, and you're not thinking about mine. I'm glad he's aware of this. And then he says, for her part, the church can never be exempted from speaking the truth about humanity and the world, resorting whenever necessary to blunt language that may initially create misunderstanding, yet truth can never be separated from charity, which always has as its root a concern for life and well-being of every man and woman. And I think that this is one of the hardest teachings of Christ, to turn the other cheek, to love your enemy, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think the Pope's getting at this here is that even when we disagree, and there's civil strife, international strife, disagreements, and even enemies in personal relationships, it's my job as a Christian to try to desire your well-being. In other words, I don't want to crush you in a debate. I don't want to own you in a debate, right? I want your you're a human being, and if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do as a Christian, I should look at you in charity and say, I don't think we agree here, but I can see what you're saying. But more than that, I need to tell the truth, and I do that in a way that is for your well-being, not so I can feel better about myself. So the second thing he said was very recent. And in fact, it was Saturday, May 17th. He says, on that same theme, in the context of the ongoing digital revolution, we must rediscover, emphasize, and cultivate our duty to train others in critical thinking. I'm just happy to hear that. There's so much misinformation and just bad thinking. Not just misinformation, but people who don't think logically in any shape or form. And for a man of his level to promote critical thinking is, I mean, how can you be angry at that? Countering temptations to the contrary, which can also be found in ecclesial circles. There is so little dialogue around us. Shouting often replaces it, not infrequently in the form of fake news and irrational arguments proposed by a few loud voices. Deeper reflection and study are essential, as well for a commitment to encounter and listen to the poor, who are a treasure for the church and for humanity. Their viewpoints, though often disregarded, are vital if we are to see the world through God's eyes. Those born and raised far from the centers of power should not merely be taught the church's social doctrine, they should also be recognized as carrying it forward and putting it into practice. Now, you could read this in a sort of a Foucault or Marxist sense, as far as trying to bring people from the margins that have been historically marginalized in terms of their, maybe I'm polyamorous, I want to have 4 women in my life instead of just my wife. I don't think that's what the Pope means. I think what he means is the people he spent his life with in Peru who are poor. I think he's thinking in those terms, people who live without these things but still find hope and peace in God. Those voices should be listened to, even if they don't have a social media platform, even if they don't sit in the halls of Congress or on MSNBC. Now, this one is interesting and it's nuanced. He says in an address to the participants in the Jubilee of Oriental Churches, he's talking about, he's mentioning people in the East, and he did reach out also to Buddhists, and he didn't call Buddhists to repent and believe the gospel in that document, but I think what he was trying to do is interfaith dialogue and show points of commonality in as much as he could with the Buddhist belief system. And of course, at the end of the day, as a Christian, I think that Christianity is true, that Christ revealed God to us. But that doesn't mean that there aren't rays of light or points of truth in other religions. And I think to foster peace, it's good to sort of point out those commonalities when we can. But here he's saying, reaching out to other folks in the East, he's talking about really Eastern Christians. This is going to affect the Ukraine, Russia. He says a lot, but he says something very interesting to me. He says, I asked the dicastery for the Eastern churches, which I thank for its work, to help me define principles, norms, and guidelines whereby Latin bishops, that's Western Catholic, Latin Rite. If you don't know, there are different rites. There are different, the Catholic Church is very ancient. So of course there are different traditions, different cultures in which Catholicism was manifest, right? So the belief in the Eucharist and the communion of saints and all these things, that is not just bound to the West. And the Pope is pointing out that all those other rites, those cultures and traditions, there's value there too. He wants these things so that the Latin bishops can concretely support Eastern Catholics in the diaspora in their efforts to preserve their living traditions, and thus by their distinctive witness to enrich the communities in which they live. The Church needs you. And I find this beautiful. The contribution that the Christian East can offer us today is immense. He says a lot, but cutting to it, he says, it is likewise important to rediscover, especially in the Christian West, a sense of the primacy of God, the importance of a mystagogy, and the values so typical of Eastern spirituality: constant intercession, penance, fasting, weeping for one's own sins, and for those of all humanity, It is vital then that you preserve your traditions, lest they be corrupted by the mentality of consumerism and utilitarianism. Your traditions of spirituality, ancient yet ever new, are medicinal. In them, the drama of human misery is combined with wonder at God's mercy, so that our sinfulness does not lead to despair, but opens us to accepting the gracious gift of becoming creatures who are healed, divinized, and raised to the heights of heaven. I found that just beautiful. And so what I do know is that some of my Orthodox friends, I have a few, one of the issues that they have with Western Christianity, including Catholicism in say, America, is that it's been too influenced by modern philosophy, they think. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true, especially less so with Catholicism, but consumerism, I think Western American liberalism, not in its positive senses, but in its negative senses, utilitarianism, these are sort of specifically Western views that people in the East don't want. Really, if you grew up in America or England, don't think that the rest of the world thinks as we do, right? Especially if you're a leftist-minded person. People in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, etc., there are lots of people who really don't want all the things that we're selling. And I think the Pope is saying, it's good for you guys to keep the sacredness of your liturgies. In fact, the West could probably stand to revisit some of these things. Now, I thankfully have attended, my wife and I, beautiful liturgies in the Catholic Church, Novus Ordo, that are done well. I'm just so humbled and grateful for that. But as you know, there have been some more modern takes on liturgy, even in the Catholic Church, that are lacking. Now, the sacraments are still valid, but the beauty, the sacredness is not reflected as well. And the Pope is, I think, saying, yes, the folks in the East, keep your traditions in that sense. And we in the West need to make sure we're doing the same, reflecting these things that are true. I found that just encouraging. The Pope elsewhere has said in his address to the Brothers of the Christian Schools, he says a lot, and he's talking about, of course, the youth, if you will. But one thing I wanted to point out that I think is just, it's deeply problematic in the world now, and I'm encouraged that Pope Leo XIV has noticed this. In the modern West, we focus less on community, less on honor, less on a family name, and more on the individual. And in some ways that's been good, but we've taken it to the extreme where when we're fully autonomous, when we're fully hyper-individualized, that will inevitably make people very lonely and feel like they don't have community the way they're designed to have. Aristotle said we're social creatures. The modern West has sort of made us islands to ourselves, but we can't live this way. This has caused isolation and loneliness, a lack of sense of purpose. So he points out, he says, think of the isolation caused by the rampant relational models, increasingly marked by superficiality, individualism, and emotional instability. The spread of patterns of thought weakened by relativism. Again, this is sort of the thing where it's all equal, so just choose, not choose what kind of job you're going to have or who you should marry, but there are literally people who think that they're trying to identify as animals. At what point can we say that's not healthy? This is not a relative choice. The prevalence of rhythms and lifestyles in which there is not enough room for listening. This is not just on the left or the right, I think. This is all around. Not enough room for reflection and dialogue at school, in the family, and sometimes even among peers themselves, with consequent loneliness. And I'll see where he goes with this, going forward, what he offers as solutions, but I'm just encouraged again that he's noticing this as a problem. So what do you think about these statements? I don't think that these statements should be controversial, and yet they're making headlines, and I've seen in those digital spaces, a lot of vitriol, debates, arguments from people who are already thinking, well, I was a fan of Pope Leo XIV, but now I'm going to back away, or other people applauding him further. This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, I'm a convert to the Catholic Church. Please, if you watch me, I really do appreciate it. But watch, better resources than me. Scott Hahn, John Bergman for biblical study, things like this. As a convert to the Catholic Church, I just wanted to leave you with something from the Catechism. The Catechism instructs Catholics, and I think this is true for all Christians, To avoid rash judgment. Sometimes we can be quick to judge not just what someone says, but their motivation in saying it. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever had someone try to judge or assume your motive in saying or doing something in life? And they assume that you're a bad person, or you're ignorant, or that you're lying, or anything like this. And that can be true of us, but if you have truly good motives, and they judge your motives poorly and dismiss you, that can be a frustrating thing. Online, in these digital spaces, that can be a very common thing. In our face-to-face life, that can be a hurtful thing, right? What we're to do is to avoid rash judgment. Everyone should be careful to interpret, insofar as possible, his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. And I think this is going to apply of us to Pope Leo XIV. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it, and if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that he may be saved. And I think this is something that we need to do, is not judge the motives of Pope Leo XIV poorly, to be rash in our judgments, but to give him some charity as this pontificate takes shape. I've got some heavier things I'm wrestling with that I think I'd like to make some videos about. Two of these stronger arguments for atheism would be the problem of evil and what's called divine hiddenness. And I'm working through thinking about videos I can do that might just not solve all the problems, but maybe give you a bit of things that I've struggled with, and then sort of what helped me, and I think give a Christian, and maybe in my case a Catholic, response to those things. So I'm thinking through that, but I think those might be interesting videos. Whoever you are, whatever happens in your life, please don't forget, you matter. Someone on this planet loves you and thinks about you when you're gone, so if it's late at night and you're discouraged, you're down, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, just know that the night's going to end, the dark days pass, so stick around, okay? Life is worth living. What's that old poem? The powerful play goes on, and you can contribute a verse. So contribute a verse, okay? As always, thanks for watching. God bless.